Welcome to this explainer on the universal features of life. Have you ever just stopped to look around and marvel at the sheer chaotic variety of living things on this planet? We're talking millions of species. Each one is completely unique, yet each faithfully reproduces offspring that share their exact same quirks. When you really take a step back and think about it, it's an incredible mystery.
Take a sea urchin and a mouse, for example. On one hand, you have this spiky, aquatic, seemingly alien creature. On the other, a fuzzy little mammal munching on a berry. They could not be more different. Honestly, if you knew nothing about modern biology, you'd probably assume they operate on completely different rules of physics and chemistry.
So, that brings us to a massive question. What do a mouse, a sea urchin, and let's say a piece of seaweed actually have in common? Well, the discoveries of the 20th century gave us the answer, and it's nothing short of stunning. Despite looking infinitely varied from the outside, every single living thing on Earth operates on the exact same internal, microscopic rules.
Section 1. The illusion of diversity, the shared secret of life.
All of that mind-boggling variety we see every day is, at a cellular level, an illusion, because all of those complex creatures actually start their existence from a single, universally functioning unit. Consider a single frog egg cell. It looks like a tiny blob of matter, sure, but inside that one microscopic space is the entire genetic blueprint required to construct a complex, multicellular animal. The whole organism is generated by cell divisions from that one starting point. Nothing less than a cell has this capability, the ability to gather raw materials, consume energy, and construct a brand new cell in its own image.
Section 2. Nature's universal chemical code, the hard drive of life.
Think about it like this. Cells are essentially microscopic information processing machines. Much like the computers we use every day, they deal in data, archives, and code to function. And without a single known exception, all living cells on Earth store their hereditary information in the exact same format, double-stranded DNA. It's a linear chemical code made of just 4 monomers, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, A, T, C, and G. Just as your laptop uses zeros and ones, life uses these 4 chemical letters. You could literally take a piece of human DNA, drop it into a bacterium, and that bacterium's machinery would read it perfectly. It is a completely universal language.
Now, the really crucial part is how this code manages to copy itself without breaking down over billions of years. It pulls this off through a process called templated polymerization. Because of how they're built chemically, A always binds to T, and C always binds to G. So when a cell needs to divide, it just pulls its double helix apart. Those weak bonds separate, and the cell uses the existing strands as physical templates to build brand new, perfectly complementary strands. This guarantees the biological archive is faithfully replicated, letter by correct letter.
Section 3. From archive to action. Translating the code. Having a massive biological hard drive is great, but it's pretty useless if you can't run any programs on it, right? So here is the fundamental workflow of biology. Step 1 is our DNA. That's the fixed, highly protected archive. In step 2, the cell transcribes specific segments of that DNA into RNA. You can think of RNA as a disposable printed transcript or a temporary working copy. And finally, step 3, that RNA is translated into proteins. Proteins are the actual physical machines in the cell, doing the real heavy lifting. There is a massive jump in complexity here that we have to talk about. We go from a very simple 4-letter storage alphabet in DNA and RNA to a much more complex 20-letter alphabet for proteins, which are made of amino acids. By stringing together different combinations of these 20 amino acids, the cell folds them into incredibly precise 3-dimensional shapes. These shapes act as highly specific catalysts, enzymes, that drive practically every chemical reaction keeping the cell alive.
And here's where it gets really mind-bending. Life is an autocatalytic process. It's a self-reproducing feedback loop. DNA contains all the instructions needed to build proteins. But, and this is a big but, you absolutely require those proteins to catalyze the reactions that copy the DNA and read its instructions in the first place. Polynucleotides and proteins are perpetually creating one another. It's the ultimate biological catch-22 operating in perfect harmony. There's a great quote from our source material that really hits the nail on the head here. As information accumulates, disconnected facts and impenetrable mysteries give way to rational explanations, and simplicity emerges from chaos. It's a beautiful way to summarize how the cell operates. But here's the catch. This beautiful, orderly simplicity doesn't come for free. There is a harsh, thermodynamic reality governing how this chaotic system sustains itself.
Section 4.
Information costs free energy, the constant battle against entropy.
To maintain this incredible cellular order and copy vast amounts of genetic information without errors, a heavy price must be paid. The stark truth is that a living cell is a system operating far, far away from chemical equilibrium. To create a new cell in its own image, it has to constantly consume free energy from its environment. If it stops taking in that energy, it decays toward chemical equilibrium. And in biology, reaching chemical equilibrium means only one thing: death.
So where exactly does the cell spend this massive energy budget it works so hard to collect? Well, it spends it on information. It takes energy to ensure the high-fidelity matching of those DNA letters, actively shaking off mismatched nucleotides so the code stays pristine. It takes energy to physically pry the old DNA strands apart to copy them. And it absolutely takes energy to build all those RNA transcripts and stitch together those complex 20-letter protein machines. Every single step of creating and maintaining life costs energy.
Section 5. The cellular fortress, the plasma membrane.
Now, if you're going to capture all this free energy and meticulously build these delicate information processing machines, you can't just do it out in the open ocean. You need a boundary. Every cell solves this with a plasma membrane made of amphipathic molecules. That's really just a fancy way of saying one end of the molecule loves water and the other end absolutely hates it. Because of this simple trait, when you put them in water, they spontaneously self-assemble into a closed barrier, tucking their water-hating tails on the inside. They automatically build a protective fortress to safely house the cell's machinery.
But hey, a fortress is pretty useless if you can't get fresh supplies in or take the trash out, right? The membrane isn't completely sealed. Embedded in this wall are highly specific transport proteins acting as selective gates. The genetic code specifically designs these gates to determine exactly which raw nutrients are allowed to enter and which waste products get kicked out. It is a highly regulated microscopic border crossing.
Section 6. The minimum viable cell. How simple can life be?
We've talked about DNA, RNA, proteins, energy, and membranes. Let's zoom all the way out now and ask the ultimate question. What is the absolute minimum amount of machinery required to pull off this phenomenon we call life? To figure that out, researchers look at organisms like Mycoplasma genitalium. It's a tiny, fascinating bacterium that survives with the absolute bare minimum genetic code possible. It does rely on its environment for a lot of ready-made molecules, but it still has to run its own essential operating system to survive and reproduce.
So what's the magic number? 477. It only takes 477 genes for this organism to manufacture all the DNA, RNA, and proteins required to sustain its life. That is the core minimum set of instructions for existence.
To put that into a digital perspective, because this is just wild to think about, the entire genome for that living, breathing, reproducing organism is just 145,018 bytes of information. That's roughly the size of a single chapter in a digital textbook. That tiny, microscopic amount of data holds the entire comprehensive recipe for a living thing.
So, we're left with this massive question. If life, with all its unbelievable complexity, can exist and sustain itself with just 477 genes and a few 100,000 bytes of code, what does it truly mean to be alive? These simple, universal chemical rules, DNA to RNA to protein, powered by free energy, wrapped safely in a membrane, govern absolutely everything, from a tiny bacterium to the sea urchin to the mouse, all the way to you and me. I hope this explainer leaves you in as much awe of biology as it does me. Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning this incredible world we live in.